Hi, my name is Elliot Haspel and welcome to another edition of Best Practices Weekly. Today we're going back to reading and we're going to be talking about another article from The Reading Teacher in which two teachers from a Virginia elementary school and two researchers from an organization called Literacy Partners International talk about a way to get students really thinking and talking about books through the use of structured discussion prompts. One problem that often kids have when thinking about books is that it's hard for them to think about them in a very deliberate way. And so when teachers ask them questions like, what did you think of this book? They get very generic answers. It was good, or I didn't like it, or it was boring, or any of these very generic answers, but they're not really thinking in deep ways about the book. And so what these authors talk about is that actually if we give students discussion prompts and if we sort of teach them very scaffolded in a structured way of how to talk about books and to think about books, it can really change the way that students are engaging with reading in total. And so the four prompts that these authors talk about using, and there's a reason they're in a very poorly drawn wheel, which we'll talk about in a minute, is talk about your favorite parts, add something new to the book, this book reminds me of, and tell me in your own words what happened in the book. And the authors talk about a couple of ways to use these prompts. First, they talk about it's important to introduce the prompts one at a time. So students would be overwhelmed if you threw these four prompts at them and they said, ready, go. So focusing one at a time and talk about your favorite parts. And be very explicit. What does that mean to talk about your favorite parts of the book? What are some examples of that? Model it. Work with it as a class. So work with that one prompt for a little while and then move on to the next prompt. This book reminds me of. Again, teaching, what does it mean to use that prompt? How do we think about what books remind us of? Then, once all four of these prompts have been introduced and students have some level of understanding of how to use them, the authors suggest actually using a discussion prompt wheel as a way of getting students both engaged with these ideas of using these prompts and also as a very structured way to really force them, hold them accountable for thinking and talking about books in serious ways. So, the authors suggest having a big wheel, this is a poor approximation of one, for the whole class discussions, when the whole class is reading a book or when you're doing a read aloud perhaps, and then giving each student a smaller wheel, perhaps laminated so they can take it home, which again has the prompts like this. And if there's a spinner on these wheels, you can have students literally spin around and be like, okay, for this book that I'm reading, for this Junie B. Jones book, or for this The Red Fern Grows, whatever book it is, I need to add something new to the book when I'm talking about it. And again, this can be used at an individual level, have students doing it on their own book when they're reading independently. It can be used as a whole class. It can be a really powerful tool the authors talk about when doing group work and having students engage with one another in talking about books. And really, this is a pretty straightforward sort of article this week, but I think the power is understated in that if students, these authors suggest, if students are able to start talking about books in this way, you can actually, after a while, start weaning them off reliance on the wheel. And what these authors found in doing this work in actual elementary classrooms is that students, once the wheels were taken away after they got very good used to using them, continue to talk about books and think about books in very different ways. That's all for this week, and we'll talk to you again soon.